Montana Territory, April 1883, the wind blew hard across the wide plains outside Miles City, kicking up dust that clung to the hem of her dress. The train pulled away with a long, hollow whistle, leaving behind only silence and the woman sitting alone on the wooden bench by the tracks. Her gloved hands trembled in her lap and her hat had slipped sideways, casting a crooked shadow over her face. She did not move, not even when a tumbleweed bounced past her feet. Cassian Zeller pulled his horse to a slow stop. He had only come to town to collect fencing wire and mail, nothing more. But there she was crying so quietly it was more a shaking than a sound. He watched for a moment, unsure if she wanted company or to be left alone. Then she wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and let out a small broken sound that twisted something in his chest. He stepped down from his saddle. "Ma'am," he said gently, dusting his hat off and holding it in his hands. "You all right?" She looked up. Her eyes were red, full of tears and confusion. She tried to speak but only shook her head, then covered her face with her hands. Cassian knelt in front of her, slow like approaching a skittish colt. "You waiting on someone?" She nodded, then shook her head. "I was," she whispered. He never came." The wind tugged at the curls that had slipped from beneath her hat. Up close, she looked younger than he thought, maybe 22, 23, but there was weariness in her eyes that told him she had seen more than her share of hard times. "I am Hazel Hartley," she said after a long pause. "I came from Ohio. I answered an ad." For a mail-order bride, Cassian's jaw tightened. He had heard of men doing wrong by women this way, promises made and broken. He leave word? No. Hazel looked down at the letter in her lap. Only this. He said to come on April 3rd, that he would meet me here. But the station master says no one's come for me, and there is no one by the name of Clyde Brewer in this county. Cassian's hands curled slowly around his hat. Then he lied to you? Hazel nodded once, silent tears streaking her cheeks. Cassian reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, clean and neatly folded. He held it out to her, and after a pause, she took it. "You got any place to stay?" he asked. "No," she said, voice fragile. "I sold everything to come here. I have nothing left." Cassian stood then, looking at the empty tracks stretching out into the horizon. He did not know this woman, but he knew that kind of ruin. He had seen it in his mother's eyes after his father died, in the mirror after the fever took his brother. "You are not staying out here," he said. "Come on, my wagon's this way, I will take you to my ranch." She blinked up at him. "Why?" "Because no decent man leaves a woman stranded by the tracks with nothing but a broken promise." Hazel hesitated, then stood, her small bag clutched close. "All right." The ride to the ranch was quiet but not cold. Hazel stared out at the spreading landscape, the soft hills, the creek cutting through the land. Her fingers clutched the edge of the seat, but her shoulders started to ease. Cassian glanced at her once. "My place is quiet. Just me and the land. You will have your own room. No one will bother you." "I appreciate that," she said. "I am sorry if I am a burden." "You are not." They reached the ranch near dusk. It was a modest place, but solid. A sturdy two-room house, a barn, and a corral with 3 horses. There was a garden out back, not yet planted for spring. Cassian helped her down from the wagon. "There is a spare room inside. You can sleep, clean up, whatever you need." Hazel paused at the door. "Why are you being so kind to me, Mr. Zeller?" He looked at her directly, calm and steady. "Because someone should." The first few days passed quiet. Hazel helped in the kitchen, folded laundry, and stood in the doorway watching the wind rattle the prairie grass. Cassian worked from sunup to sundown, but he always came in to check if she had eaten. He never asked her questions she did not want to answer. On the 5th morning, she followed him out to the barn. "I can help," she said, holding up her hands. "I am not made of glass." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. You can help me muck the stalls." She wrinkled her nose but smiled, and he laughed softly. That night they sat by the fire after supper. Hazel sat with her knees tucked under her, a cup of tea in her hands. "My mother died when I was 16, she said quietly. "My father drank. I thought if I could marry, start fresh somewhere, I would have a life worth something." "You still can," Cassian said, looking into the fire. "You are strong, stronger than you think." She looked over at him, her eyes soft. "What about you? You have no one." "Not anymore," he said simply. "My family's gone, just me now." Hazel set her cup down and stood. She walked over and knelt by his chair. "You saved me, Cassian." He looked down at her, his breath caught in his chest. "You did not have to stop. You did not have to take me in, but you did." "You saw me." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You looked like you needed someone." "I did," she whispered, "but I never expected to find you." She leaned in slowly, and he let her. Their lips met in a gentle, uncertain kiss, but it deepened, wrapped in something warm and real. When they pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "I do not want to be just a guest here," she said. "Not if you feel what I feel." "I do," he said. "Hazel, I do." He stood and took her hands. "Come morning, if you still want it, we will go into town. I will marry you proper." Tears gathered again in her eyes, but they were different this time, full of hope. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that." They married in a quiet ceremony the next morning, under a patch of pale sky just beginning to warm with spring. Reverend Mott led the service with a calm dignity, his voice low and steady as he read from his worn Bible. Hazel wore a faded blue dress she'd pressed the night before, the same one she'd arrived in, with a white ribbon tied at her collar. Cassian had scrubbed his boots, shaved close, and found a clean shirt. Neither of them had rings, but when the Reverend asked if they pledged themselves, they answered without hesitation. Afterward, as they stepped out onto the church steps, Hazel paused beside him. "Does it feel real to you?" she asked, her voice quiet beneath the wind. Cassian looked out across the empty street, the hitching posts, the clapboard fronts of the mercantile and assay office. Then he looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it does." They rode back to the ranch with the marriage paper tucked between them, Hazel holding it like something fragile and rare. Cassian didn't say much, but his hand rested on hers the entire way. She didn't pull away. At the house, he showed her the small chest near the foot of his bed. "This was my mother's," he said. "Inside there's linens, a shawl, a book of Psalms she used to read. If you want anything from it, it's yours now." Hazel knelt beside it, lifting the lid with care. Her fingers brushed over a hand-stitched handkerchief, the edges worn thin. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on it before she closed the lid again. That evening, she stood barefoot at the wash basin, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Cassian came in from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You don't have to do all that," he said, watching the steady rhythm of her arms as she scrubbed. "You can rest." "I want to," she said without looking up. "My hands need something to hold on to," he nodded, setting the rag on the hook. "There's a patch of earth behind the barn, not much but enough. If you want to plant something, it's yours." Her hands stilled. "I used to help my mother with the garden. She grew lavender near the porch. Said it kept the bad spirits out." Cassian leaned against the doorframe. "Then we should get some seed from town. You tell me what you want, I'll fetch it." Hazel turned, drying her hands. "You always offer things so freely." "Doesn't it feel strange, doing it for someone you barely knew a week ago?" He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "I know how you carry yourself, quiet but not afraid. You didn't crumble when you were left behind. You stood up and walked on. That tells me more than time ever could." Her breath caught, just barely. "You see me clearer than anyone ever has." "I see what's right in front of me," he said, voice low, "and I mean to keep it." They stood close, the air between them charged with something deeper than words. Hazel reached out, her fingers brushing the buttons of his shirt. "I want to build something here, not just survive. We'll make something worth keeping," he said. That night they shared a bed not from necessity but choice. It was quiet, no rush to it, no pretense. Cassian lit the oil lamp and turned down the covers, and Hazel stepped into the room without hesitation. They undressed in silence, modest and slow, and when they lay down, it was with hands that knew gentleness and eyes that stayed open. Afterward, Hazel curled against him, her head beneath his chin. "I never thought peace would feel like this," she whispered. Cassian's arm tightened around her. "Me neither." In the days that followed, they found rhythm. Cassian showed her how to saddle the gentlest mare, and Hazel rode with a straight spine and quiet determination. She started a small row of onions behind the house and asked for mint, too, for tea. She mended a worn curtain and sang low under her breath when she worked, songs Cassian didn't recognize but listened to anyway. One afternoon, they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the cottonwoods along the creek. "I used to dream about a place like this," Hazel said. "But I always woke up before I got there." Cassian reached across and took her hand, his thumb tracing the ridge of her knuckle. "You're not dreaming now." She looked at him then, searching his face like a map she hadn't finished reading. "No," she said at last. "I'm not." By mid-May, the wild flocks began pushing up around the edges of the pasture, and the soil behind the barn warmed enough for planting. Hazel knelt in the soft dirt, her skirts tucked beneath her knees, pressing seeds into slender rows with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd reclaimed the use of her own hands. Cassian stood nearby, leaning on a shovel, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat. She didn't ask him to help, he just did, wordless and steady, digging where she pointed, hauling water from the creek without complaint. "You always this agreeable?" she asked without looking up. "Not always," he said, tipping a glance toward her. "Just figured I ought to make a habit of it now that I'm married." She smiled, not coy but honest, and wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of dirt there. "You don't say much unless it matters. I reckon you say enough for both of us." That earned a laugh, low and warm, and she sat back on her heels. "What did you want before all this? Before the ranch?" Cassian ran a hand through his hair, squinting against the sun. "I used to think I'd head south. Maybe see San Antonio or the Gulf, but the years got busy. Then the land needed me." "You ever regret staying?" He looked at her, really looked, as the wind brushed through the cottonwoods behind them. "Not anymore." Hazel's throat tightened, but she only nodded and turned back to the soil. She didn't need grand declarations. She had his presence, his labor beside hers, his eyes steady when they met hers. Later that week, a letter arrived from a woman who had shared the train berth with Hazel as far as Bismarck. Cassian handed it to her after supper, and she read it by lamplight, her lips moving silently. When she folded it, her hands lingered on the paper. "She married the man who sent for her," Hazel said, voice unreadable. "He's kind," she says, 20 years her senior, but he treats her gentle." Cassian didn't press her thoughts. He waited. "I'm glad for her," Hazel added. "I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone." He reached over, brushing his thumb across her wrist. "You got here instead." "I did," she said softly. The next morning, Cassian saddled both horses before sunrise. Hazel blinked at him from the porch, still tying her braid. "Where are we going?" "There's a man west of here who keeps bees. I thought maybe we'd trade for some comb. You said you liked honey in your tea." Hazel pulled her shawl tight against the early chill, her breath a silver thread in the air. "You remembered that?" "I remember things that matter." The ride took most of the morning. They passed through low valleys flecked with wild grasses and over a narrow ridge that opened into a basin dotted with aspens. Hazel didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. She rode beside him, her eyes moving with quiet wonder over the land that was slowly becoming hers, too. When they reached the apiary, the beekeeper, a wiry man named Judd with a sun-darkened face, offered them a wedge of honeycomb wrapped in waxed cloth. Cassian traded a pouch of cured tobacco and a pair of mended stirrups for it. Judd nodded toward Hazel as they mounted to leave. "Fine woman," he said simply. Cassian didn't answer, but the way he looked at her said enough. That night, Hazel placed the honey on the table and cut a small piece with the tip of her knife. Cassian had already unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled his sleeves, his forearms streaked from fence work. She held out a sliver of honeycomb. "Try it." He leaned forward and took it from her fingers, their hands brushing. The honey melted slow on his tongue, sweet and rich. "Worth the ride," he said. Hazel let her hand rest on the table between them. "This life we're making, it's not what I expected. But I think it's better." Cassian covered her fingers with his own. "It's ours, that's what makes it right." Outside, the coyotes began their dusk chorus, distant and fading. Hazel stood and banked the fire while Cassian latched the doors. No ceremony, no need for it. Just the weight of the day settling over them like a quilt, warm and certain. When they lay down that night, Hazel turned toward him beneath the quilts, her hand finding his in the dark. He didn't say anything, just pulled her close, her breath easing out against his chest. Neither of them spoke again before sleep took them. but in the hush between heartbeats. There was nothing left unsaid by early June. The cottonwoods along the creek had leafed out thick and green, and the horses stood glossy and lean in the pasture, flicking their tails through the warm air. Hazel stood at the edge of the porch with a tin pail in one hand, watching the clouds gather low in the west. Cassian came up behind her, his boots soft on the wood. "That's a thunderhead," she said, not turning. "You can feel it in your ribs." Cassian followed her gaze. "We'll need to bring the chickens in early. Storm like that could knock the coop clean over." They moved without much talk, practiced now in the rhythm of work shared. Hazel carried feed while Cassian hammered the shutters closed. When the first drops hit, they were heavy and sparse, darkening the dirt in wide, uneven circles. Inside, the storm broke sudden and sharp. Rain slapped the windows and thunder rolled low across the land like something dragging chains through the sky. Hazel stood by the hearth, one hand braced on the mantel, her face lit by the flicker of the fire. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said. "When I was little, I'd crawl under the bed and plug my ears." Cassian poured water into the kettle, setting it on the iron hook. "What changed?" "I stopped having a place to hide." He looked at her from across the room. "You do now." She met his eyes and held them. "I know." By the time the rain eased to a soft patter, the sky had gone dusky and the fire burned low. Hazel sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through a small stack of sewing pieces she'd found in the bottom of the old chest. Cassian sat nearby, carving a new handle for the barn door latch. "You've been quiet," she said. "I was thinking about the river," he said. "Up north past the Rimrock. There's a stretch of it that cuts clean through a canyon. I haven't been since I was a boy." She looked up from her cloth. "Is it far?" "Half a day if we ride steady." Hazel folded a square of calico and set it aside. "Let's go." Cassian paused, the knife still in his hand. "You want to ride that far?" "I want to see the places that shaped you," she said. "If we're building a life, I want to know all its corners." They left before dawn 2 days later, carrying only what they needed. Hazel rode astride with the ease of someone who no longer second-guessed herself in the saddle. They passed through open country, the land rising and falling like the back of something sleeping. Cassian pointed out an old trapper's post, long collapsed into itself, and a stand of trees where elk bedded down in the fall. By midday, the canyon opened before them, a sudden, steep gash in the land, the river running blue and fast at the bottom. Hazel dismounted and walked to the edge, the wind tugging loose strands from her braid. "It's beautiful," she said. Cassian stood beside her, close but not touching. "I used to climb down there with my brother. We'd fish, mostly, skip stones." She looked up at him. "What was he like?" He crouched, picking up a flat stone and turning it in his hand. "Louder than me, always had some scheme. He'd talk his way out of anything." Hazel knelt beside him. "You miss him?" "Every day." She rested her hand lightly on his. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." He didn't answer, but he didn't move either. They sat there until the sun started to dip, golden light catching the rim of the canyon. When they rode back, it was slower, the silence between them rich with unspoken things. That night, Cassian placed a single wildflower on the table beside Hazel's plate, a blossom she hadn't seen him pick. She touched it lightly. "What's it called?" she asked. "Don't know," he said. "Just thought it looked like something you'd keep." She looked at him, the corner of her mouth pulling upward. "It is." The wind outside had settled. The air inside was still. Hazel rose, came around the table, and slipped her hands into his. "I want you to know something," she said. "I didn't come here looking for rescue, not really, but I found something steadier than I ever believed I could have." Cassian held her gaze. "So did I." They stood like that, hands joined in the quiet house, while the fire burned low and the night drew in close around them. Neither of them said the word love. They didn't need to. It was there in the way they stood, in the hush that held no distance between them. By the end of June, the first rose of Hazel's garden had taken root. The mint had spread fast, scenting the air when the wind passed low through the backyard, and the onions showed thin green shoots rising from the earth. She tended them in the early light, before the heat settled heavy, her hands sure in the soil. Cassian would watch her from the barn door sometimes, quiet in his admiration, never interrupting. They'd grown into the shape of each other's days without needing to talk about it, her stitching shirts on the porch while he greased the tack, their boots side by side near the bed come nightfall. Still, Hazel had begun to think of the future in terms of more than rows to plant or fences to mend. She wanted permanence, not only in the land, but in the way they belonged to one another. One evening, as the light faded gold across the field, she sat beside him on the porch steps, her bare feet brushing the cool boards. "I've been thinking," Hazel said, eyes on the swallows darting above the barn roof. "We could build another room onto the house." Cassian glanced sideways, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "What for?" "I'd like to start a school here, not formal, not like back east, just a place where ranch kids could learn their letters." "There's no schoolhouse within 20 miles. She waited, unsure if he'd be open to the idea. He ran a hand along his jaw, then nodded once. "We've got the space," he said. "And the tools, if you're sure I'll help you build it." "I am sure," Hazel said. "It feels right." That night, she brought out a folded scrap of paper and a stub of pencil. She wrote down names she remembered from passing wagons, families with children who'd stopped for water or shelter on their way west. She planned lessons in her mind as she drifted off beside him, the shape of this new future forming quietly under her ribs. The next weeks passed in measured work. Cassian sawed planks and framed the walls while Hazel cleared the small room they'd used for storage. They hung a slate board he'd traded for, and she stitched a curtain for the window from an old flour sack. By early August, the room had light and warmth, and the first 3 students arrived on horseback, 2 boys and a girl, siblings from a homestead north of the creek. Hazel met them at the door with a calm smile, her hands folded over her skirt. "We'll start with reading," she said. "No need for uniforms or silence. Just respect for one another and a want to learn." Cassian stood back, out of sight, but he listened to her voice rise and fall with gentle instruction. Later, when the children had gone, she held up a broad-shouldered cotton shirt one of the boys had outgrown. "His mother left it as thanks," Hazel said. "Said it might fit you." Cassian took it and held it up. "Looks like she's a good judge of size." Hazel stepped closer. "You've given me more than I knew to ask for. A home, yes, but room to grow inside it." He folded the shirt and set it on the table. "You've made it more than it ever was. You didn't just settle in, Hazel. You rooted." They stood a while in the quiet that had come to feel like company more than silence. Then he reached into his vest pocket and held something out to her, a silver locket, simple and worn, etched with a wild rose on the front. "It was my mother's," he said. "I kept it because it was hers. I want you to have it now." Hazel opened it. Inside was a small lock of hair, pale brown with a curl still in it. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Cassian said. "You're my family now." She closed the locket and held it tightly in her palm. Then she stepped into his arms, not needing to ask if it was all right. He folded her in close, his chin resting where her shoulder met her neck. That night she wore the locket to bed, the chain cool against her collarbone. They lay under the open window, the breeze bringing in the scent of rain on distant soil. Hazel turned toward him, her eyes already soft with sleep. "I never imagined this life," she murmured, "but it's the one I would have chosen." Cassian brushed his hand through her hair, slow and certain. "Me too," he said. They drifted to sleep with the hush of crickets outside and the steady beat of one another's breath in the dark. The seasons turned. Autumn brought a golden hush to the land, and children came more regularly to the small schoolroom. Hazel taught by oil lamp when days grew short, her voice steady, her presence a kind of constancy the children clung to. Cassian repaired the barn roof before the first snow and built shelves for her growing collection of lesson books. One evening in early winter, Hazel set a loaf of bread on the table and turned toward him with her hands on her hips. "I think come spring," she said, "we ought to think about making room for someone else." Cassian looked up from where he was oiling a saddle strap. "You expecting someone?" she smiled, and the expression lit her from within like fire under frost. "I believe I might be," she said. He rose without a word and crossed to her, setting his hands gently on her waist. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "We'll make room," he said. Whatever's needed. Snow fell that night, soft against the windows, and inside the house, warmth held fast a fire in the hearth, a cradle already forming in their hopes, and two people who had come to each other not through chance, but through every quiet choice that followed. Years later, children ran through the fields behind the house, laughter chasing through the tall grass. Hazel stood at the porch rail, her hand resting on the round of her belly again, while Cassian carved initials into the new gate he'd built. The old locket still hung around her neck, a part of the life they'd forged. They'd known hardship, yes, but they'd outlasted it, with each other, with love that never had to announce itself to be understood, and they were happy. Fully, deeply, quietly happy.